Hello guys, today is part 10 of our Final Fantasy VII Comparison Series, taking a look at chapters 10 of Gallagher's work, and a little bit of chapters 26, 27, and 28 of William's work, a little bit more than that in fact. So, let's get started. We're going to be covering the boardroom meeting, and the whole trying to breed Red and Aerith experiment before they end up getting captured and brought before Shinra. So, the good bits, the climax of the Shinra Tower infiltration right up until the Trail of Blood sequence, which is where things start to get serious. So, let's start with Gallagher's work. Okay, so let's surprise nobody here and start with another description of Gallagher's, but this description focuses more on characterization than it does on scenery. The way we get introduced to Hojo here just absolutely hits everything about him, his demeanor, his physicality, and so forth, in just a couple paragraphs. This is from page 165. Professor Hojo's mumbling could be heard from the flights above as he read aloud from his clipboard, accompanied only by the shuffling squeaks of his shoes. His footsteps were paced, suggesting each marble stair proved a difficult obstacle to his frail legs, moving leisurely through the floors with his attention trained solely on his report. His drawling voice filtered eerily down through the stairwell of the special block to the pursuing trio, low and nasal, as if it was perpetually laden with disgust. Swiftly and quietly, Cloud, Barrett, and Tifa trailed the scientist from a secure distance, cautious not to alert him to their position. Cloud noted the levels as they ascended from the markings on the security doors: 63, Department of General Affairs; 64, Executive Lounge and Gym; 65, Executive Infirmary. After a short time, Hojo came to a halt on the landing of the 66th floor. With what seemed like an eternity, as he perused the final passages of his document, he finally swiped his card and ambled through the electronic doorway. You hit everything there. You hit every single point about his character. The mild contempt, the age, the pacing, just everything about him without saying a single word. So our heroes solid snake their way around the corridors, and in an attempt to dart out of sight of oncoming employees, they accidentally find their way into the men's bathroom, or lavatory, as Gallagher calls it, using the regional dialect. Now, I don't know about you, but lavatory sounds like a place where they study volcanoes. I guess that would be the exact opposite of a water closet. I'm sorry for the potty humor, I'm just flush with puns today. In all seriousness, I like that Gallagher has them not being super stealthy, but, as he puts it, bungling. I mean, that seems realistic. As an avid player of D&D, this is about how most stealth checks go. It's humanizing. They aren't an elite, stealthy squad. They are a former soldier, a bar owner, and a brick shithouse, respectively. Also, on a related note, it doesn't surprise me that only one person fit into that vent, by the way. That's more realistic. So, as we start with our boardroom meeting, Gallagher slips in another compilation reference talking about Fujito. It's only a sentence, but I like to give attaboys when I see them. Now, this scene is one of those you really gotta read the whole scene moments. We get a fascinating cross-section of Shinra, just like we do in the game. In fact, both authors do this scene really well. This is, of course, where we bring up the Neo-Midgar plan. I think my favorite description here is that of Scarlet, although I really feel like this is one of those paragraphs that would appear in a hashtag "This is how men write women" blog post, but it's totally true to her character. He describes her as fully aware of her beauty, and somebody who intentionally seduces others to get what she wants. I mean, come on, that's the OG Scarlet right there. Shinra deflects Reeves' concern about public image just as he does in the game, and this is where Gallagher goes off script for a bit to add an extra layer of nefarious to this company. Let me go ahead and give you another quote here. Now this quote is from page 169. "Do we have the casualty figures yet?" Reeve asked. "We announced on Shinra News that there were little civilian losses," replied Scarlet with a wry smile, "but early indications show the death toll figure to be in the thousands and rising. We can't have the public thinking we didn't do enough, can we?" Are you still debating the decision, Reeve? President Shinra posed, staring intently at the Director of Urban Development. I just think we could have thought it through a bit more, he responded uneasily. Considering the damage on Reactor 1 and Reactor 5 caused by the recent terrorist attacks, an incident like this is bound to have some detrimental effect on the company. The Chief of City Planning Division earlier asked me to pass on that because of the poor management of the city's reactors. The machinery is becoming inefficient, and it's badly affecting output. With that in mind, now that Reactors 1 and 7 are out of commission for the foreseeable future, we're all but running on half power. I can't help but feel that the consequences on the energy supply will... That's enough, Reeve, halted the President, his jaw clenched. Let's keep our focus elsewhere for now. See, there's that deception, the fact that they know they're full of shit. They're lying about the death toll, instead of trying to play it up. And this is what's really interesting, because the authors tackle this differently. The way they handle it is completely different. In Gallagher's version, they minimize the effect. They say, oh, this was no big deal, we managed to save everybody, it's a horrible tragedy, but fortunately not many people died, and they're blatantly lying about the death toll. Which seems interesting, although it's the kind of it kind of shows how suppressed information is in Midgar. But you'll see later, Williams tackles it a different way, and I'm not certain which one is better, but I think they're both good at painting Shinra as, villainous fuckheads, and I like it. So Palmer, of course, then asks for space program budgeting, which is where we get his introduction paragraph. Now, I like Palmer as a character. He's so dopey, he doesn't belong in the group, at least in the game. Another moment here I like that shows Shinra, despite being pure evil, does have his pragmatic side here, is when they mention the rate hike, tra-la-la-la-la, and he says that Reeve and Scarlet will divvy up the excess. This is the same as it is in game, but presumably this is to placate Reeve and to give Scarlet resources for the Neo Midgar plan. Now, in Gallagher's version, Heidegger chimes in that he wants some of the funds too, and Shinra basically asks him, why? Is there something new going on? I really like this, not just because Shinra basically shuts down Heidegger with a sentence, but because it really illustrates that what Shinra cares about more than anything is money. He's not evil because he's just a cackling villain, although he kind of is, but because evil happens to be the best way to get him money. Then Hojo has his piece where he talks about, well, breeding Aerith. It's as inhuman as ever and delightfully heartless, as we've come to expect from Hojo. And to wrap up this section, yes, we do end with Scarlet's "something stinks" line, which was a cute little nod to the game. So Cloud tells the others what's up, and that Aerith is in the building and they better go save her. There is a long section of description here as the group makes their way through the laboratory levels of Shinra Tower, dripping with suspense, and a lot of little Easter eggs here and there, such as mention of death claws, bombs, and Arimans. They overhear Hojo talking to his technicians. Now, here's the thing. Hojo refers to Red 13 as Sample 418, and I can't help but notice that 4 plus 1 plus 8 equals 13. Well played, you beautiful math bastard, you. Fun story, so I tweeted that out, and Mo got back to me and said, well, the other motivation is the fact that Nanaki's story is told in episode 18 of the 4th compilation title before Crisis, hence 418. So, works on so many levels. Shortly after this, we have the Jenova moment, and let me tell you, I have never needed to quote something from his book as much as this scene. The creep factor is very high here. So let me pull this up. It is from page 177. Jenova? Bracing his arms on either side of the porthole, Cloud inhaled deeply and peered inside. As his eyes adjusted to the light, he saw the naked form of humanoid female take shape before him. Her disfigured body was covered by a frail layer of deathly blue skin, stretched and torn in places, wrapped within a cocoon of organic matter. Small globules of yellow pus oozed from the open sores on her chest and stomach, the viscous substances staining her fragile skin. As the pink glow grew fainter, Cloud gasped in horror. A sight more gruesome than he could have imagined met his widened stare. Where the head of the being had previously existed, nothing but a ragged stump of a neck protruded from her shoulders. He gaped without comprehension at the figure, a great ringing sound in his ears once more. Crying out with pain, Cloud fell to his knees, memories of that night flooding his mind. The intensity of the flames, the anger of betrayal. So, Cloud has himself a little freak out. We get a lot of key points from the original game here. In particular, the creepiest, but also the most hilarious out of context line, when Barrett just yells, "Where's its fucking head?" Now let me tell you, as a boy, that moment is creepy as hell, but the creature in the Mount Nibel reactor is the one that legitimately gave me the willies. Fun fact, when I saw it when I was like 11 or 12, it legitimately gave me nightmares. What I'm saying is Final Fantasy has some terrifying imagery. Somehow Ultimecia's final form, aka Mrs. I Don't Have a Face, didn't freak me out as a kid, but this one did. But I guess I just wasn't expecting it. Anyways, moving on. So they go ahead and bum rush Hojo, taking immediate control of the situation for about 2 minutes, until, like in the game, Hojo points out that none of them have a high enough science or computer handling stat to free Aerith. It only takes Hojo revealing his bestiality fetish, which causes Barrett to remember that he does in fact have a very high weapon spec in firearms, and proceeds to shoot his way out of the situation. What he does here now is something that I think needed to be done in game. Red's first line is basically, yeah, I couldn't keep Hojo pinned down. He was stronger than I thought. Which, okay, that explains why he kind of just bolted. But it does beg some explanation. Who knows, maybe Hojo had been juicing himself on Jenova cells this entire time. Oh, and by the way, to quote Antfish from the beginning of the abridged version, dog can talk. There is a lot I like here. For one thing, Gallagher has Red describe his moniker as an epithet, a description of a characteristic, but decidedly not a name. Literally changing one word from the original script helps reinforce that sense of detachment that Red feels for his identification. I mean, he's Nanaki. Red ain't his name. He's literally called Red because, again to quote the abridged version, "My fur is red, and they seared the number 13 into my flesh." I hope that's a decent enough impression. Okay, now, forgive me, my compilation knowledge is limited. They pass a few other cells on their way out. Their sample HO512, which is a nod to the boss that we didn't fight, but also Cobalt 14, Indigo 15, and Ceres 16, or if you prefer, Blue, Purple, and Red. Are those references to the Deep Ground guys? So rather than getting trapped in the elevator, the gang find themselves cornered by a squad of soldiers, all wielding the standard issue hard-edged swords, a nice nod to the weapon. Turks show up, there's a nod to Corrin, and they're dragged before the President Shinra for a fair trial. Okay, almost done with this chapter. There's a personal soliloquy moment in Shinra's head here, as we once again get that sense of this being a personal feud. This is where the compilation comes in really handy for Gallagher's purposes here. Shinra brings up Fujito and Elfie from before Crisis, and I think Fujito appears in Crisis Core as well. We're not going to exactly sympathize with this guy, but we do get a better understanding of his motivation as a character. If they were any old terrorist, Mr. Pragmatic here would have them gunned down. He wants to see them suffer and pay. It's a nice touch, and a good send-off to his character, because if you don't know what happens next, well, spoiler alert. Apart from that, the scene plays out pretty much as it does in game, with a few nods here and there for the continued search for Corneo. And that about wraps it up for Gallagher's work. Moving on to Williams, once again, we start mid-chapter and we end mid-chapter. This is a bit inconvenient for my purposes, but I don't want to give the impression that Williams chooses poor ending points for his chapters. His writing and pacing are just fine, and the chapters end when they need to. It's just another example of the difference in the way these two authors choose the structure of their stories. But anyway, we'll be covering page 222 up to the top of page 248. Now we start with another of Williams's great names for his character, the given name for Scarlet, Andretta. And since I made a comment about how Gallagher describes Scarlet, let's go ahead and make the first quote here about how Williams views the character. This quote is from page 222. Or, I am sorry, 223. Made a mistake there. Andretta Scarlet was always early. She considered the notion of being fashionably late appalling, and otherwise bad for business. And so it came that she was in the boardroom minutes before the meeting started. The twin doors opened at the end of the board table, a long slab of Corellian sycamore, surrounded by tall leather chairs. At the head, the president's seat was taller and more majestic than the rest. Demi-columns along the walls illuminated the room with glass braziers that imitated natural light. Running along the center of the table was a green strip of glowing Mako-encased glass. She enjoyed the quiet of the room before anyone else arrived. Her briefcase made a satisfying click on the long table. She sat to the immediate left of the president's seat, the lucky side. The tall leather chairs had cushioned headrests and wheels. She reclined, the chair didn't so much as squeak, and snapped open her briefcase. She flipped through the latest designs and reports from her department. Shinra engineers had made her a gun with a record-breaking RPM. She could just see the smug look on their faces. Didn't they know their job was to break records? The focus here is less on her physical characteristics and more on her goals and her personality quirks. And I have to say, I love that he's made her a driven, obsessively punctual, somebody who enjoys her own personal time. I really enjoy those aspects here. What's interesting is that Gallagher plays up her less desirable qualities. She's a villain, so he focuses on what makes her unlikable. Williams goes in a different direction and focuses on her strengths, while not ignoring the fact that she is a villain. It results in a more subtle and more human characterization, and I have to admit, it did do a little bit more for me. But that said, I think Williams is kind of going off in a different direction with her. He adds a layer of deniability to her, since it's revealed that the weapons development team was left out of the Sector 7 plate discussion. And in fact, Scarlet wasn't briefed on the situation at all. Scarlet even considers the situation as being crazy, and having found out about it via the same cover stories as the citizenry. This, I have to admit, confuses me a little bit, and I think it's the flip side of that humanization. Now, I can see making a complex character with shades of moral complicity, but what I don't get here is it's almost like Williams is creating an out for her character, to possibly set her up as being a Reeve-like figure. And, speaking of Reeve, she deduces that Reeve must have known as well, and seems to take personal offense at the idea that Reeve was consulted on the matter, and not her. This plays well at their relationship, and reveals Scarlet's cattier, pettier side. Don't get me wrong, the whole situation is fascinating, as it's a great look into the internal politics of Shinra, as Williams is writing it. Williams also takes the time to introduce the characters as they enter the boardroom, giving us almost a parallel view to Gallagher's Yaphet Palmer being the next guy to show up. Giving us Scarlet's view of all of these people is interesting, because we're also getting a sort of social hierarchy established. She chides Palmer for being stuck in his rut, but then excuses her own as being due to red tape, not idiocy. There's a line about the vent above them making noise to punctuate the silence, which is, of course, Williams' way of foreshadowing the three being in there, without beating you over the head with it. It's a nice little subtle touch. In fact, despite how over-the-top Williams usually is in his handling of the diabolical Shinra Corporation, there's a great deal of subtlety to this scene. It plays out very Game of Thronesy. Even further to this is that Shinra, Heidegger, and reluctantly Reeve all play this thing up as a tragedy taken at the hands of Avalanche. I love this decision, because not only does it further the tension between the members of the staff, especially Scarlet, who knows better, but it adds an extra layer of guilt to Reeve's character. Much of the rest of the meeting up to this point goes as it did in game, and Gallagher's version of events, albeit with no whining from Heidegger for more funds. That was Gallagher's invention. And with a little side commentary from Scarlet. She describes the Midgar plan, or the Neo Midgar plan, as a money hole. Lastly, Williams also makes the mention of the something stinks line. However, there's an added layer of... Okay, I know it's the word of the day for me today, but there's an added layer of subtlety to it. It's not spoken, it's the line that ends the chapter, and it's implied as a final capper to Scarlet's assertions. Something stinks, both literally and figuratively, because she knows she's being fed a load of bullshit. So we pick up on chapter 27 on page 231, where we get a little mid-resolution again. Williams is fond of that tactic, and it works well enough. Let's take a quote here to fill in the gap. This is page 231. In the duct above the boardroom, Cloud, Barrett, and Tifa lay on their stomachs, watching the scene through a vent. The meeting ended and the executives trickled out of the great doors. Cloud wriggled his way back to where the three of them had climbed up. He dropped down into the bathroom stall, his feet landing nimbly on the seat. He didn't stay to watch Barrett try and make the landing. He walked out of the washroom and waited for them in the hallway. Finding the vent was a stroke of luck. Tifa had heard voices in the washroom, and they investigated, happening upon their lofty vantage point at the beginning of the meeting. Sadly, it had been short, too short for the barriers on the execs to fade. When they emerged from the washroom, Cloud led Tifa and Barrett towards the conference room, his mind on someone in particular. Slowing at a corner and peeking around, Cloud saw his mark pass through a wide doorway into the stairwell. A solid door of white metal slid shut behind him. When it closed, it made a pressurized thunk sound. "I remember him," Barrett tried vainly to keep his voice down. "That Hojo guy. He's in charge of the Shinra science department. Cloud, you met him before?" "This is the first time I've ever actually seen him. After all these years, it was nice to finally put a face to the name." He turned back, signaling to Barrett and Tifa. "We should follow him." There's a cute little scene that follows here between Hojo and his lab assistant Mortimer. I swear, Williams has entirely too much fun naming his characters. I know I'm guilty of this myself. We get a real sense of Hojo's harshness here, and his general no-nonsense, science is everything, I just want results, bring me pictures of Spider-Man attitude. I'm sorry, that went places. In this scene, there's a great little bit of writing. It's kind of shop talk here. Mortimer talks about Red 13, but rather than use the name Red 13 with caps and the Roman numerals, we just see it as the words Red 13. This is because the characters who are listening to it don't know, nor could they assume, that it's a proper noun of sorts. It's just a clever little touch. It adds a little disconnect. I like that. As they sneak around, they come across shipping crates, which is basically a laundry list of Easter eggs. I'll be blunt here, this doesn't seem as clever. Gallagher managed to weave these into the narrative. Williams basically has half a page that my eyes just kind of gloss over. I know this is supposed to be mostly a positive thing, but if there's one thing I would change about this chapter, it would be that section. We get the Jenova bit too, Williams managing to pack a decent punch here, and giving Barrett time to be a little goofier. He goes full ham, literally screaming, "Where's it fucking head?" in full caps there. I kind of like this because Barrett is definitely not a reserved individual. So to avoid too much repetition here, the scene with Hojo and his little breeding experiment plays out pretty similar to Gallagher's work, but there is one difference here. Hojo freaking stabs Red with a dagger, which allows him to get out from under him and run away. This is what causes Red's missing eye. It's a delightfully visceral scene, which gives an explanation to Red 13's big boss status. I think this is one of the stronger decisions he made, and I know it seems like it's not a big deal, but I like how it ties up that scene nicely. Cloud also is forced to use healing magic to save Red here, and describes himself as feeling very drained, like he gave all of himself to do it. Another nice bit of magic lore. There's a cute moment of banter between Ares and Red, too. Gallagher has it all, well, mentioning the choice and the whole "I wasn't gonna force myself on you just because I'm an animal" thing. But Williams, being the cheeky sort that he is, has Ares make a comment about how she's not into dogs either, but hey, he's probably very cute for his species, which leads Red to comment that he's actually the last of his species, and if nothing else, being the last of his species serves as vanity. It's admittedly a little bit out there, but I like these kind of interactions, and it's what I love about Williams' writing. It's just, again, it's nice to throw those in when you can. They end up taking an elevator and getting caught by the Turks, similar to how it happened in the game, although the chapter ends with a badass line from Sung, telling Cloud to give up his sword unless he wants to try and use it. Nice. Alrighty, nearing the end here. Chapter 28 picks up on page 243. Red refers to Avalanche as a free company. Now I know Williams didn't play FF14 at the time of writing at least, and I know the term hails from history relating to mercenary forces from the 12th or 14th century. But still, my Final Fantasy XIV playing butt got a little chuckle out of that. Shinra, when describing the Cetra here, makes a reference to how they have this yearning in their blood, similar to that of salmon returning to their spawning grounds. This is interesting because he makes it sound very similar to the reunion, intentionally creating a dichotomy, and perhaps even an intentional comparison. leaping way ahead here, but Sephiroth mistook himself for a Cetra for a while. Perhaps he got the idea. Or perhaps Jenova polluted that idea as well. Interesting to mull over. Alrighty. Well, there's a nice little character moment here that I actually chose to quote over something earlier, because it is William's invention and takes place between Cloud and Shinra, and the writing is spectacular. It's character development and world building and foreshadowing and just wow. So let's end on this quote then. Page 245. Cloud, what rank were you? First class. Shinra hummed and thumbed his mustache with the hand that wasn't holding the cigar. Not many make it to first class. So what happened? Cloud thought about what to say. I saw more profit in self-employment. Ah, Shinra's business smirk returned. You and I are very much alike. Did you fight over in Wutai? Just missed it. Ponderous ways they had, but they weren't idiots. He walked back around his desk. There's an old Wutaian proverb. It doesn't rhyme in the common tongue, but nevertheless it has a nice ring to it. The quest for money makes empires fall. First your enemies, then your own. I always liked that. It scared the dickens out of me. It should scare you too. Cloud shrugged. I'm not an empire. All men are empires. Shinra took a long puff of his cigar. After I crushed Wutai and turned it into a theme park, I was almost surprised that I hadn't immolated Midgar society in the process. It was then that I realized something. I love money because I love the world. My allegiance isn't to Gil, but to an ideal of the future, a paradise that I can share with all mankind. I commit myself wholly to that idea. It lingers in my sleep. It forces my waking hand. That has saved Shinra Inc. from its proverbial doom. You shared that allegiance once. You made it all the way to first class. So I'll ask you again, what happened? Cloud answered honestly. Our ideas of a brighter future looked pretty different. Shinra nodded. Yes, I see. Your idea of a bright future is a handful of Gil coins on a banner of ash. Cloud did not respond. I'll have to stop here for reasons of balance, but it goes on to Shinra offering Cloud a full pardon and 5 million Gil to publicly execute Barrett. The idea being that they can tell the public that he was a double agent, and, as Shinra puts it, rogue soldiers are bad for business. He makes a really tempting offer here, which Cloud doesn't buy and ends up refusing outright, after mocking Shinra a little bit. Seriously, those last 3 pages of this section are amazing. Astounding character writing. You really have to read it. Well, that was a long one, but the next part I can tell you is going to be pretty short. I paced it out. Gallagher's next chapter is 15 pages, and Williams is 10 pages. That'll be a nice quickie before the finale, I guess. So, what's the big takeaway from this part? Characterization of villains. While Gallagher has lorded on the evilness of the humans in charge of Shinra, Williams is oddly humanizing at points. It works in some ways, and in other ways it falls flat. For one thing, I think Gallagher has a much more consistent tone. The Shinra execs feel more menacing, more threatening. This is what happens when you don't have those human elements shoved in your face. They can be there, but if you don't draw so much attention to them, you create a more intimidating villain. As far as Williams' version, well, I feel like I could walk in there and have a friendly chat with them. I mean, he makes them more complex and more human, which I generally like in villains. I do like having a villain I can understand. I try to write my own villains that way. It rings more true to life, which is great, but the problem is they don't seem as threatening. Now, to his credit, as I said before, Williams does make Shinra as a whole seem a lot darker. There's a lot more of that nastiness and Orwellian future, you know. But I feel like he could have kept the dark tone and kept the humanizing elements without opening them up so much. I feel like he maybe tipped his hand a little bit too much in the direction of humanization, with the exception, as I pointed out, of Shinra, who he writes wonderfully. Like I say, his President Shinra is on point. he's got some human elements to him, but he's clearly a vicious bastard, and I love it. So I'm not going to say that one is better than the other. I really don't think either one is stronger generally than the other, but they are two very different approaches to constructing villains. So you have to kind of make your own decision on that one. And again, even though they're very different, they both led to some really fun villains, and this is a really fun section to read. So I can't say one is better than the other. Alrighty, well, that was long, but we still have the Nibelheim Incident. And since we're already running at half an hour, oh man, these are long, let's just go ahead and do my quick, concise recap of each chapter. I'm doing 11 through 15. So, Chapter 11 starts out with Tifa reminiscing on her mother's death. There's a lot of poetic imagery here, and the flow of consciousness that follows leads us on a small tour of her memories related to Nibelheim. It's so wispy and dreamlike. I would really like to see how Gallagher take on the live stream scenes in the book. I'm really excited now to see how he handles Cloud finding himself. There's a cute scene that follows here with Tifa and her father, as Tifa's daydreaming has caused her to be late, of course. It's another wholesome, fate-tempting scene, although I have to admit this is something like our 5th one now. It's like in the movie Titanic, you know, the scene where that guy is like, God himself cannot sink the ship, and us moviegoers in our smug, hindsighty ways are like, oh, that's what you think. Nibelheim Incident seems to have that scene almost every chapter now, albeit from different character perspectives. And hey, considering how things are going to turn out in the second half of this book, I say let them revel in the good times while we have them. The latter half of this chapter is the outset, with Tifa and her pa meeting Zack, Sephiroth, Cloud, and the namesakes. Of course, she doesn't know it's Cloud. Very by-the-book scene here, but I want to call attention to the way Gallagher has already slightly shifted the tone. He mentions how the Manor grounds have, quote, an unnatural aura of despair. The mood is definitely swung into the ominous, if it wasn't already there. The chapter ends with the photograph and a cute little line from Sephiroth, which, in so many words, tells the guy to fuck off. I liked it. You have to interject those small moments of comedy where you can. Also, need to take a moment here to comment on the lovely artwork by Crimson Sun here. I particularly like this one because I like what she did with the reticle. I may be reading too much into this, as I want to do, but I notice how Tifa is locked away in the inner reticle, and the two soldiers are by themselves on the outer reticle. Might not mean anything, might just be the way it was set up, but I like it. I thought it was cute. So, Chapter 12. Chapter 12 is a dramatic irony buffet. It's told from Zack's perspective, and as much as I love Zack, he is perpetually the least informed person in Final Fantasy VII, with the possible exception of Cloud. Tifa asks him if there's a whole bunch of soldier first classes, and he's like, nope, we're the few, the proud, the shippable, completely unaware that he is dashing her hopes of seeing soldier first class Cloud. Cloud, who is there without Tifa knowing it, defends her from an attacking Deathclaw, and Zack tosses him a nod, thinking it's just bravery and not aware that he and Tifa are friends. There's just so much going on between the characters, and none of them are fully aware of who's there. I like that. I like that. That creates really interesting writing dynamics. I like that. This encounter also gives us a nod to Angeal, as Zack dutifully explains why he uses the blunt side of his blade. Use brings about wear, tear, and rust. I always thought it was just because he was a Kenshin Himura cosplayer. Anybody? The trek through the mountains continues with some really vertigo-inducing imagery from Gallagher here. His strong point as always. And then we get the action moment of the bridge snapping. And this scene is done beautifully. The references to the wind, the sensation of falling, it's just everything is there, and he hits every sense. And of course, you know, Red was the unlucky soul who didn't make it out. And I'm forced to point out that Red was the red shirt of the group. I happen to know Gallagher is a punny bastard who you did this. I don't know, assuming Red, I don't know enough about Crisis Core. Unless Red is like actually the name of the guy who went missing, good on you, man. Tifa led them to the cavern system and tries to deny the fact that this is totally where she goes to get high. Mysteriously colored caves? Come on, Tifa. The chapter ends with them stumbling upon the Mako fountain, which manages to even get Sephiroth a moment of awe. Now, I don't do quotes here for the Nibelheim Incident section because of reasons of wanting to keep it contained and, relatively short. But the way Chapter 13 opens up describing the Mako Fountain is just beautiful. We're picking up from Cloud's perspective here. This entire scene plays out really, really well. Sephiroth explaining that people don't care if beautiful, natural miracles like this fade away, so long as it gives them an easy life, hammering home the environmental message already prevalent in Final Fantasy VII, amongst others. Cloud intentionally deepens his voice here. I like that. He even goes in his head, can't be too careful, Tifa might notice. This is where Sephiroth reveals the connection between Mako and materia, the fact that condensed Mako becomes materia, and that sometimes this occurs naturally. Side question here, why didn't they do more with that place in the game? Like, it'd be cool to go back there in Disc 4 and have there be, like, one of the, ultimate materia that you could get. It's easy to get to, relatively speaking, but, I don't know. Seemed like a little bit of a Chekhov's gun. Anyways, now, we also mentioned Hojo at this point, and I always love the description of a walking mass of complexes to describe him. Not Gallagher's invention, but still fun to read nonetheless. After this, we get a fun little battle scene with some harriers and dragons, resulting in some magic and swordplay to break up the exposition. Sephiroth grimly confirms that the Turk's report is right, and they'd better get a move on because the reactor employees are probably very dead. We wrap up Chapter 13 with Sephiroth telling Cloud to stay outside and guard Tifa, a job I'm certain he'll do perfectly fine. Okay, now Chapter 14 is comparatively a long one, and it covers a lot of ground, so brace yourself here. We, naturally, taking this in from Zack's perspective, get a long, loving description of the reactor, with more than a few foreshadowing nods here. Sephiroth explains that he isn't sure they can fix the damage, but hey, at least that explains all the dragons. He then comments, many a creature are drawn to where Mako is plentiful. And that is perhaps the most important sentence of lore in the entire book. It foreshadows the ancients, Jenova, and even kind of throws shade at Shinra Inc., comparing them to dragons. The investigation reveals that Mako has been diverted from the three main reactors into a condensation chamber. Sephiroth tells Zack that Shinra knows about the true potential of the lifestream, and Soldier and the Ancients projects are just the tip of the iceberg. He honestly points out that somebody obviously thought that the Mako would have better use in this chamber, and then ends this tirade with the classic, watch out, this isn't just a reactor spiel. And of course, here we go, it's off to the races with Jenova. Well, everything here follows as you would expect, with Sephiroth slowly piecing things together for the big reveal. Now, my concise review here, condensing like 4 pages, cannot possibly do this scene justice, but it's beautifully written. He milks every ounce of tension and suspense he can, and you get to see Sephiroth's mind work as he's slowly putting the puzzle pieces together. It's a really, really well-written scene. You spend the entire chapter waiting for the other shoe to drop, because you know how it's going to go down, and even knowing that, it's still edge-of-your-seat writing. And now, here's where the compilation rears its ugly head. Sephiroth goes in, Sephiroth says, am I even human? And he realizes that the monsters have been created with the reactor, and that he might be a monster. And that's when Genesis shows up and is like, yep! So Genesis, who is, looking very sprightly for a dead man, asks Sephiroth if he can spare a cup of energy. I'm quoting Team 4-Star a lot in this episode. And he tells him that the secrets can be found in the Shinra Manor library. He then quotes Loveless, because he's Genesis and that's what he does. Sephiroth denies Genesis' request for aid, but decides to check out the library anyway. As they walk away, Genesis quotes some more foreshadowing Loveless lines, which Zack describes as being of little importance to anyone but himself. This is where we readers get to go, and that's what you think. Alrighty, whew, goodness, this has been an ordeal. Chapter 15 is pretty short. Let's go ahead and wrap this up. It focuses on Heidi, and is mostly used to fill in a few gaps here. They went on a search for Red's body, they couldn't find it, she has to declare him KIA. Then this gets her to thinking about some of Zack's past, including when Zack had to put down a few of his allies who lost their marbles thanks to Fujito. The more I learn about this guy, the more charming he sounds. Zack arrives back and lets Heidi know the wonderful news that Genesis is in fact alive. Sephiroth stormed into his room to be alone for a while, and Cloud was wounded, protecting Tifa from Monster. And this chapter has some good characterization of Heidi, continuing to show her as a genuinely good person, despite her company affiliations. But what I love about this line, and the perfect way to end it, is another one of those "this ship can't sink" moments. Heidi ends the chapter by saying, "Your hero will be safe. There are no monsters here." Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to be derisive. It's really good writing. And it's very, on-the-nose foreshadowing. But knowing how things turn out, that line is as tempting as it gets. That line is the "I'll be right back" of lines. Okay, and that's that. Wow, this has been I think this might be my longest episode yet. Where are we at? 41 minutes! My god, this has been, like I say, it's been an ordeal to say all this. I hope I sound like halfway as good as the writing is, explaining it to you guys. Seriously, I've had a lot of fun. Not only was this section of the main book just some of my favorite points in the entire game and really helps amp things up, preparing us for the finale, but the Nibelheim Incident chapters are basically the core incident. This, going forward here, the next few chapters, we're going to start getting into, dark territory. So, brace yourself for that, kids. As always, much thanks to the amazing MJ Gallagher, author of the Unofficial Final Fantasy VII novelization, and my editor, and Xander Williams, author of the Jenova Project and The Mercenary, the first book of the Jenova Project. Oh, and the first book, by the way, of Unofficial Final Fantasy VII novelization was A New Threat, by the way. Just thought I would bring that up here. And finally, many, many, many thanks to my Patreon Knights here. I gotta give daps to them. Of course, MJ Gallagher, Matthew, Caveat Zealot, and Robin Berg. Thank you guys so much for your support, and I hope you enjoy what I do here. We got some exciting stuff coming up, so prepare yourself, and we have 2 episodes left of this series. I'm getting a little teary-eyed, but I'm also coming up on 43 minutes, so I'm going to leave you here now. Thank you guys so much, and hope you have a great rest of your day.